Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. Hello, I'm Steve Sokol and I'm the president of the American Council on Germany, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special edition of the ACG's Kaffeepause series. Today I'm speaking with a journalist based in Washington, D.C., and not someone who's based in Berlin. I am delighted to welcome Ines Pohl. She's the Washington bureau chief of Deutsche Welle. And before assuming her current role, she served as the editor-in-chief of Deutsche Welle from 2017 to 2020. And before that, she spent 2 years as a correspondent in Washington. So she knows Washington really well, and she knows Germany and Berlin very well. Ines, herzlich willkommen. It's wonderful to see you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for having me on this very historic day in a way.
Yes, so I'm really happy that you have the time to have a conversation with us today on the heels of Chancellor Friedrich Merz's first visit to Washington, D.C. in his role as Bundeskanzler to meet President Donald Trump. And obviously, there's lots to talk about, lots to think about. There were not any fireworks, which people had imagined might be the case, but I'd love to maybe start by asking you to share your initial reaction to the visit, sort of what your main takeaways are from Merz's visit to Washington yesterday.
Yeah, so I think the first feeling was really relief. You know, I've been at the White House when Zelensky was there, and I'm the South African president, and of course, most and mainly Zelensky. It was such a shock. I mean, I was there with some colleagues from Ukraine, and literally some colleagues started to cry. So I think everybody was really aware. Oh my God! Hopefully, this doesn't happen again. I mean, nobody expected it to be as bad as with Zelensky, of course, but there was some fear. Stephen, you know, I was at the at the press briefing at 8:30 in the morning with the newly elected chancellor. He gave this press briefing in the Blair House where he spent the night, which was already kind of a good sign.
Mhm.
I've never seen any chancellor really having a press briefing there. So he really enjoyed the setup in this beautiful building. And I already had the feeling he's very poised. He was very concentrated. He was very focused. He said early in the morning he hopes that he has to speak very little, you know, and that Donald Trump gets
Interesting. Okay.
the most floor. He already, you know, talked a little bit about the present, but he was really his mindset was really like, I know, because we all know Friedrich Merz can also be impulsive and he also can be somewhat aggressive. But he was really like in this, yeah, in this mindset, you know, I will be friendly, I will be humble. This is the first meeting I'm having in my new role with Donald Trump. So I want this to be not a deep dive and not a complicated political conversation, just a nice first meeting. And I think that was the aura, if you want to say that, with which he started this conversation, and it obviously worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, it really did. And I think that there were a lot of people who were worried that there might be some sort of a provocation, the way that we saw it, certainly with Zelensky, but even with Ramaphosa, and that there could be some sort of a trap that hopefully Friedrich Merz was preparing for and not acting on that sense of impulse that you just talked about and not being provoked. But there wasn't really anything, there wasn't any bait that he rose to. I think instead, he did a very good job of sort of responding to the president about the different issues that came up. One thing I wanted to ask you was, it was certainly noticeable in the press briefing in the Oval Office that just the body language from the two of them was very, very different. Coming back to your comment about Friedrich Merz's aura, I thought it was fascinating to see Friedrich Merz sort of leaning back, legs crossed, looking comfortable, weighing in as it was appropriate, and the president sort of sitting, leaning forward. Two completely different stances. Were you in the Oval Office for that press conference as well, or did you follow it on television? And what was sort of your takeaway about just the mood in the room?
Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't get in. It was very limited. Also interesting, Friedrich Merz brought the largest delegation of journalists I have ever experienced. So he had 37 or 8 German colleagues in his plane. So he
Wow.
really knew how important that meeting
Yeah.
was, and he really wanted to have a big entourage following him. So he knows how to set himself up uh, in a positive way. So I wasn't able to be in the Oval Office, unfortunately. I have been there a couple of times. I also was able to attend the press conferences with Starmer and Macron. So, I see Trump fairly close, fairly often. And I agree on you. It was really nearly spectacular, I think, how relaxed the German chancellor seemed and how kind of tight Donald Trump seemed. But I think honestly, Donald Trump's uh, kind of posture or appearance had little to do with Friedrich Merz. He's in a very difficult spot right now. We probably will
Hmm.
talk a little bit about Elon Musk later, but his
Yeah.
big, beautiful bill might not go through. It's not looking good. He only can lose 3 senators, and more people are saying, well, I didn't really read that through. It's too much. My constituencies don't like this or that or whatnot. So he's under a lot of pressure. He seemed to be tired. Donald Trump, not as like aggressive and malish, if you wish, as he was in other meetings. That might have been playing in favor of Friedrich Merz a little bit as well. But Friedrich Merz knows how to play his height. He's even taller than Donald Trump.
Hmm.
Something the American president obviously reacts to. I don't know if you saw, or our fellow viewers here, how the handshake went. So Trump has this thing, he takes the hand and pulls people over to him as a first sign, hey, I'm here, the big boy in the house. But Friedrich Merz kind of pulled it back. So, from the very first second on, there was like a little, hey, dude, I'm on Augenhöhe with you.
Yeah.
And that played out throughout the whole meeting, I think.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think, so much of it is the optics of these kinds of meetings and these settings. And from what you're describing, Friedrich Merz going into this as sort of being a first meeting to try to sort of set the trajectory for the relationship that they will have with each other. Let's face it, they're both new, right? Friedrich Merz has been in office for a month. Donald Trump has been in office for a little bit more than 130 days. And so they have at least 3.5 years to work with each other moving forward. And so I think it's incredibly important that they get off to the a good start. I guess one question that I think all of us are grappling with is, did Matz do enough with this meeting to sort of recalibrate or stabilize the bilateral relationship between Washington and Berlin right now?
I think the word stability and Donald Trump don't go together. So
Hmm.
you never know what Donald Trump's next steps are. Does he needs another distraction because the problems here in his own country getting worse from his perspective? Might then Germany be a good target, or Europe even more? So that's the other thing. I really think, with all the relief we might feel and the hope we might have now after this first meeting, we shouldn't take it as any guarantee that like we are on a good path here. I think
Hmm.
Donald Trump is very unpredictable. We have seen that, he can say something in the morning and he says the opposite in the
Yeah.
evening.
Yeah.
Um, that was also interesting because we had this discussion with the German colleagues who were here and followed Merz, So how was it afterwards? And of course, many German journalists always look at something they can be very critical with the government, the German government. So
Hmm.
some said, well, Donald Trump was far too, not Donald Trump, excuse me, Friedrich Merz was far too flattering. He should have been more aggressive, and always he was smiling and nodding and whatnot. I love to criticize politicians if they
Hmm.
be
Hmm.
criticized, but um, for this very first meeting, I really think Friedrich Merz did the best he could, and he had like two crucial moments when he really spoke up. It was D-Day, when Trump said, "Oh, that was a bad day for you guys, Germans." And then he said, "Well, not really." Of course, trying to implement the thought that intervention was needed to end the Second World War, and saying, "You, Mr. President, are the most important person in this conflict with Ukraine, and you are the only person, as further or other presidents did with the Second World War, to stop this war." So I think that was very smart, very flattering, but also very clear. And then, of course, when he talked about Russia and Russia being the aggressor, being the country which started that war, something Donald Trump didn't really like to hear, but he didn't kind of reply to that. He said, we mumbled something, but it stood there as the writing on the wall: Russia is the aggressor. And I think that was the main message Friedrich Merz wanted to put out there, and did it successfully. So I don't see, and I watched actually the conversation twice now. I hardly see any moment where Friedrich Merz, have done better than he did, to be quite frank.
And I mean, of course, there were conversations that happened off camera, and we can talk a little bit about sort of what we know and what we've heard about that in just a minute. But Friedrich Merz gave a press conference after his talks in Washington, and he talked about his takeaway being that this administration is open to having conversations. It's open to different viewpoints. He said something along the lines of both the president and he as chancellor and their respective administrations don't like being admonished publicly. And, certainly there was no sign of that. So it seemed as if there was, a real sort of alignment on that level. I think it's also, fair to say, and actually somebody just submitted a comment along these lines, that the fact that Friedrich Merz brought a copy of Donald Trump's grandfather's birth certificate from Bad Dürkheim in a golden frame really seemed to perhaps disarm Trump. I mean, it probably ties in with a number of factors. The spat with Elon Musk, the fact that maybe Donald Trump didn't sleep well, the fact that he has a lot on his plate around his big, beautiful bill, but then to receive really a very thoughtful gift, I guess, together with a golf club that has both the German and the American flags engraved on it. Obviously, the Chancellery and Friedrich Merz put a lot of thought into this meeting and prepared it well. Do you think that really contributed, really paved the way to ensure that this meeting went smoothly?
They definitely were prepared very well. I agree. I mean, his whole team, they were really up to date. And from what we know, Merz also talked not only to Zelensky, but also to Ramaphosa, of course, about business, and that South Africa is an important business partner for Germany, but they definitely also talked about the meeting. I'm not so sure with the birth certificate. First of all, he has this birth certificate already from the former Bild editor-in-chief. He gave it to him. He just posted that, of course. Proudly. And, Donald Trump is not so very proud about being the grandson of this grandfather. Why? Friedrich Trump, what Friedrich Merz pointed out, because he owned now I don't really know the appropriate English term, a whorehouse. Is this correct? So a bordel, whatever.
Yeah, bordel.
Bordel is probably the better word. And he doesn't want to be reminded of that. So and Friedrich Merz was actually really proud. He also said that early in the morning, this is a great gift. I'm not so sure. I mean, the golden frame definitely was pretty, and also the way it was put in there, very high quality, high end. But if you look at it, how Donald Trump took it and just put it away, I think he doesn't really like to be remembered so much of his German heritage. The golf club, however, I think that was a really great gift. And there were also pictures later how they used it in the Oval Office. But baseline, no, I agree with that. The Friedrich Merz team prepared the Chancellor very, very well, and he played it out superbly.
So, sticking in the Oval Office for just a minute, I thought it was interesting to also widen the aperture and look at the two sofas. And so, on the Trump side of the room, you had the vice president, the secretary of state, the secretary of the treasury. And then on the Merz side, you had Merz's chief of staff, his national security advisor, and the press spokesperson for the government. So, very different levels on those two couches. How important do you think it was to have really Merz's closest foreign policy advisors next to him, rather than somebody like the foreign minister, Joe Pohl, who had just been in Washington the week before to sort of prepare for this visit?
I think it was a very smart move. Even so, the picture showing only white men besides Marco Rubio, that's a little bit of, you think, wow, we are in the year 2025 and this is all we see. Also on the German side. However, I think it was a very smart move to have his really advisors close to him, because we didn't know. I think one big fear really was, and it was open if JD Vance would be there or not until the very end, if AfD would come up and this whole
Yeah.
debate, is Germany censoring free speech? And with JD Vance, we know he's used by Donald Trump. If Donald Trump, for whatever reason, would have thought, oh, no, I need to ambush the German chancellor to distract from my fight with Elon Musk or so, you never know that. And you can only prepare so much. So I think he brought his closest advisors for exactly that case. If something would have happened, that they could have kind of given him some advice how to react. We also asked him about AfD and a possible invention from JD Vance in the morning briefing. And he said, he would then maybe answer in German, because, his English is fantastic, of course, but, that's his language. Also to get a little bit of time if things would escalate. So he was really prepared on so many different levels. So I think that's the reason why he brought them and not Wadefuhl or Jens
Yeah.
Spahn, who of course also would have loved to see his friend JD Vance, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that he would have loved to have been present for that meeting as well. That makes perfect sense. One of the things that I think some German politicians and even some German media have been a little critical of is that Merz did not really get much from Trump. I think it was clear that the big issues on the agenda were Russia's war in Ukraine and how to sort of move forward on that together. Lots of questions around NATO and the future of NATO and the American nuclear umbrella. And there was a sense of and a hope, I think, that Friedrich Merz would come back having assured that Trump was kind of at the table. He did get, of course, a sort of statement from Trump saying how important it was to keep U.S. troops in Germany if that's something that Germany wants. And this is, of course, very different from Trump's first term, where he talked about drawing down the U.S. military presence in Germany. What's your take on sort of what Merz was able to get out of this, or is it more tempered by this was that first nice meeting and we can talk about policy stuff later after we've established a rapport with each other, and that was really the overarching goal for Merz, was to walk out of this with a good foundation?
I think, yes, that was exactly the overarching goal. And he said that ahead of the meeting and afterwards, and that was successful. I was actually surprised how clear Trump talked about American troops in Germany. That's a big get. Because with him, you never know. And I think Merz also was very aware that it doesn't make any sense to talk in this press conference in the Oval Office, in front of press about topics like that, because then, of course, Donald Trump is a super performer. That's what he said when he ambushed Zelensky. This makes great TV. So Friedrich Merz did everything to avoid the possibility that Donald Trump might be pushed in a corner and might have the feeling, now I have to show I'm the
Hmm.
big guy here in the room. Um, if there were any like detailed conversation, which I actually doubt because Trump doesn't like details, then this happened over lunch. And I think these discussions, of course, we all want to know, how does the United States stay with NATO? How safe is that? Article 5 and all of that. But this is discussed on different levels.
Hmm.
By the end of the
Hmm.
day, it's Donald Trump who is the commander in chief. But I'm sure that many, and that's what was our new foreign minister was here, Wadefuhl, by the end of last week, to talk about things like that. Pistorius will be soon here, our foreign minister, our defense minister. There will be, of course, a G7 meeting soon, and then the NATO meeting. But this discussion is done on different levels. I see that some Germans are disappointed, and they would have loved to have some more clearer promises, maybe, or a clearer agenda from Donald Trump. But that's impossible, and that's nothing Friedrich Merz could have achieved.
Hmm. No, I mean, I think you're right. I think it's probably too early at that point. But sort of diving into, just a couple of the takeaways. I mean, Trump really seemed to downplay the severity of the war in Ukraine a little bit, while Merz was able to underscore how he sees Russia as the aggressor, and he even advocated for putting stronger pressure on Moscow. Um, what are your thoughts on how Merz sort of reacted to Donald Trump's comparison of the conflict in Ukraine to two children fighting viciously in a park?
I think he did that also very, very smartly. He he stuck to his strategy. Being very nice and then making your points and then be very flattering and then being clear. And that was the same. He reacted to D-Day and to this comparison with these two
Hmm.
fighting children without saying, no, this is absolutely the wrong comparison. How dare you? He rather embraced him and then ended by saying, you are the most important person. You are the only
Hmm.
one who can end this war. Um, yeah, so I think he did well. Asking about Donald Trump's take on Ukraine and Russia, he's definitely not on the side of Ukraine. If he's on any side, he's on his own side and he wants to make deals.
Yeah.
Personally, I think he thinks Zelensky is a loser because he can't win this war. And he probably
Yeah.
has seen, he said, I don't have respect for Putin, Trump said in this meeting, but he has some kind of a respect for Putin because he's so aggressive and
Hmm.
Trump loves aggressive male behavior. But having that said, I really do believe that Trump hates wars. He
Hmm.
wants to end wars, also maybe just, of course, also, I mean, because he doesn't like seeing people dying. I mean, but
Right.
as much as we might criticize him, I mean, I really believe him that he hates seeing women, children being killed
Yeah.
by the thousands and soldiers, male soldiers as well, female soldiers. But it's probably mainly his business take as well. It's hard to
Hmm.
make money with active war zones if they escalate the way they did. I mean, he, after all, was the one who started the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan.
Hmm.
Joe Biden, of course, fulfilled it. He got the blame for it, but the initiative came from Donald Trump. So he wants this war to end, but he's not on the side of Ukraine. I mean, I
Right.
think this will never change. And Friedrich Merz, of course, can't change that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right that it's really a very complicated balancing act, and this is why, there's so much of a focus on the NATO summit later this month, and of course, the two of them will see each other, as you said, at the G7 summit. So there will be other opportunities for the two of them to engage on a personal level, but also to talk about some of the issues. I mean, of course, Merz was coming into this meeting having gotten the passage of a major funding package for defense spending in Germany, having vocalized his support for 5% of GDP for defense spending in Germany. So he had already sort of come in having met sort of some of the expectations I think that Trump might have had of him, this undoubtedly helped, create a good atmosphere. And I think, the facts that he was invited to stay at Blair House, that apparently the lunch went longer than expected and anticipated. I mean, these are good signs that the White House and that President Trump were trying to, extend a hand to Germany. So I take that as being quite positive. But of course, the devil is in the details, and I think that one of the questions that certainly I think a little bit about is what does Trump actually want from Germany? I was expecting maybe a little bit of a conversation around energy and perhaps buying more LNG, related to defense spending, buying equipment from the US. These could all be areas where Trump might come back to Merz and say, this would be really helpful. What are you hearing in terms of what you think Donald Trump wants from Friedrich Merz and from Germany?
I'm glad that you bring this up, the LNG debate and the Nord Stream 2 debate. I mean, that was also really interesting how the two men bonded over their dislike of Angela Merkel, I think, and that Merz himself said, "Yeah, I was against Nord Stream, the pipeline as well." I wouldn't be surprised if they would have talked about exactly that over lunch, that because that's of course a huge topic for Donald Trump. With the military equipment buying, I mean, I think Europe and Germany will need the equipment and the support and the help from the United States for at least another 10, 15 years, whatever. Nobody really knows, and there are so many deals going on, and they hopefully that will be kind of be continued, that we find ways to work with each other. But it's on the other hand, of course, not easy for our new German Chancellor to really fulfill all his promises. I mean, this meeting probably was also so positive from his perspective because he's still in this honeymoon phase. I mean, he promised we will have the biggest conventional army in Europe, but he not really wants to have a draft because that would just support the AfD. So how do you get enough soldiers to fulfill this promise? Then of course the money you're promising to spend, they have the money, that's nice, but do you really have the capacities, to really use the money to produce the weapons and the systems? And are you able to, bring the different systems of the European armies together in a way it is needed to really be effective? So Merz is still like, oh, I won the election and I got the Grundgesetz changed so I can spend all these trillions and billions. But, we shall see let's put it that way. We shall see where we are in 6 months or in 1 year. And if this government, this coalition is also with the SPD as a partner, which is totally against the draft, for example.
Yeah.
If he really will be able to fulfill his promises, and then it shall be interesting to see how Donald Trump then reacts. As for everything, at least on paper, sounds great. I mean, Donald Trump forced Germany to do that. This chancellor was able to deliver, of course, with the help of the Green Party and the other opposition parties besides the AfD, even the left party supported this Grundgesetzänderung. We shall see where we are in 1 year's time or so.
But at the same time, as we're having this conversation right now, in Germany, there is a discussion, and Boris Pistorius, who's also a social democrat, and the defense minister, has been at the head of this, of needing to increase the size of the German military, the size of the Bundeswehr. There's even been a discussion about trying to move forward with a reintroduction of mandatory military service, even though it would not be zeitgemäß, if you will. It would not be, adjusted to the 21st century. It would be more like the kind of mandatory military service that existed up until it was done away with. So this debate is happening within Germany, and there seems to be real recognition that the German military needs to be strengthened. And at a European level, these questions around interoperability between different European militaries, that's something that has been debated for a while at this point, certainly, but where I would say there's a heightened sense of urgency at the moment to try to figure out how to move forward with that. I think the bigger question is the question around European autonomy when it comes to defense and foreign policy, right? And this is something where Friedrich Merz, it didn't come up on this visit, but he's talked about advocating for greater European autonomy as sort of a hedge for the possibility that the US will pull back. I think that this is part of the reason why he started by shoring up support within Europe. The images of him together with Keir Starmer from the UK and Emmanuel Macron from France and Donald Tusk from Poland, of this so-called coalition of the willing, of Europeans who are willing to work together to address these security and foreign policy challenges, are important. Did you get any sense of how the president or others in Washington kind of reacted to this notion of European autonomy coming from Friedrich Merz?
I think that's nearly too complicated for the president. He just doesn't care about details. And we know that he reads very little, and his concentration span is kind of really limited. But of course, in all his advisors and the experts here, this is kind of followed very closely. But let's be frank. Sure, Friedrich Merz loves to show or to present himself now as a big European leader, and he referred to him being a member of the European Union, and he said that a couple of times, which I think is great. I mean, he on the one hand says Germany is strong, but we are always have to be considered as a member of the European Union, which comes with some flaws or some difficulties. I mean, we had the election in Poland. We know about France. As for now, Great Britain seems somewhat stable, but how long will this last? So there is, I think, I mean, you're living in the States, but I really have the feeling there is a huge concern if the European Union really will stay, or if there is a need, as Wolfgang Schäuble kind of implemented as a possibility, to split the European Union in that regard, that we have like an inner circle, of the bigger countries, and an outer circle, this Europe with two speeds and probably also two commitments, defense. And of course, now we have the Baltic states and the new members of. So it's what I probably want to say. It is Europe is not that or that reliable as it maybe was, or as it seems to be 10 years ago or so. And this is for those who have a deeper understanding of the complexity of Europe. This is, at least that's my feeling here, living in the United States. That's a huge concern, and rightly so, I think.
Granted, the meeting was only yesterday, but sort of as you've been out and about and sort of absorbing what you've heard from people in Washington, how was Friedrich Merz received? I think after the White House meeting, he was also on Capitol Hill very briefly before he had another press conference, and then headed back to Germany. How did he? Wie ist angekommen? How did people perceive him?
People don't care. I hate to say. I mean, and that was obvious, but this is always the case, right? That the American press, they always use these opportunities to ask their kind of domestic questions. And of course, now with Elon Musk, that dominates all the headlines. Ukraine it's not so important anymore. I mean, it's great that he met with Lindsey Graham again, and I think also the visit of Lindsey Graham in Germany went really well, and he gave this fantastic interview in the FAZ with a clear commitment, that he's really fighting for harder sanctions on Russia. But we also know, on the other hand, that Graham also is one of these flip-floppers.
Right.
We saw that during during Zelensky's visit. Before the visit, he was in full support, and right after the visit, after Zelensky got kicked out, he gave the stakeout, and I was literally there on the ground, saying, well, it was basically Zelensky's fault that he got ambushed in a way, which was, I think, really interesting. However, it's definitely not dominating the headlines. It's a little bit something for Feinschmecker.
Yeah.
But of course, in a broader spectrum, it's a good sign because it went well, you know.
Yeah.
I feel honestly, and that's my feeling, I went to bed with last night because we did a lot of reporting, of course. It
Yeah.
was a very intense news day for us. But I went to bed and thought, gosh, now we are relieved that the German chancellor meets the American president and they didn't fight like I don't know what with each other. That's good news. That's
Yeah.
pretty sad, right?
Yeah.
That this makes us happy that they just behaved like civilized politicians, world
Yeah.
leaders. So,
I think Omid Nouripur, the of the Green Party and vice president in the Bundestag, said something similar this morning on German media, that it's sort of a sad comment to say that the meeting between the German chancellor and the U.S. president went well, and just sort of leave it at that. And so I thought that was interesting. But one of the things that's come up a couple times in our conversation, and I think that merits a little bit of a discussion, is this public spat between Trump and Elon Musk, and how that really sort of overshadowed the visit. And I'm of two minds. On the one hand, if that had not happened, maybe there would be a little bit more interest and awareness in the fact that the German chancellor just visited. On the other hand, I wonder if it didn't deflect from some other sort of provocation that might have come up or something like that. I think that Friedrich Merz and Germany might ultimately have benefited from the timing of this, current situation. How do you think that the disagreement between, or the breakup of the bromance between Trump and Musk influenced the meeting that Friedrich Merz had with the president?
yeah, I mean, I agree. This could have really benefited Friedrich Merz. I mean, Trump was tired. He's very unhappy and very angry. And many Republicans who are critical with this big, beautiful bill, definitely angry and mad with Elon Musk. Even so, he back-channeled a little bit this morning because he's, of course, worried that he might lose even more support for his bill. So yeah, and I think even without Musk, sure, it would have gotten some more headlines, but unfortunately, my profession focuses very much on bad news. If there would have been a big shout out in the White House, that would have been, of course, on the front page of the New York Times, but it just was a normal visit. New chancellor from Germany is visiting the president of the United States. They were friendly with each other and had lunch. So what? So and that's sad. I mean, that's also something I think my profession, we journalists, have to think about, because of course Zelensky and even Ramaphosa, they dominated the headlines because it was so awkward. So yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, if you talk to lawmakers and experts, they are very well aware how important that meeting was, So it will have some effect on the public discourse, of course, and how things will be moving on, also on the Hill. I mean, these people, they watched it very closely because many Republicans still are very much on the side of Ukraine. Even so, they don't dare to be outspoken about it because they feel like the revenge from Donald Trump. But they know and they understand how important it is to limit the power of Putin. not only for European countries, not only for the Baltic states, but for the Western world as we know it. And that China and other countries are just waiting for the West to crumble. So I think in that regard, that was watched very, very closely. Even so, many lawmakers are, of course, very occupied now about their own stuff going on in this.
So let me sort of draw this to a close by asking, as you look ahead, for example, to the G7 summit in Canada and the NATO summit in The Hague, both of which are taking place later this month. What are you watching when it comes to the relationship between these two men?
I think it will be heartfelt. I think, bless you. I think we will see like romance is maybe a little much, but I think the two of them, because he was probably the last Western leader who met with Donald Trump before the G7 and the NATO summit. And again, they're also so tall. I mean, Macron is, if the two of them stand next to it, so like Macron probably doesn't like that so much. But so I'm sure we will see a lot of like handshakes and shoulder clapping between the two of them. And I'm also sure that Friedrich Merz is very well prepared. He seems to be also very close, as you just said, to the coalition of the willing. I think Europe, also with von der Leyen, who delivered, in my humble opinion, a great speech in Aachen, they know that Europe has to stand together, and they appreciate that now with Friedrich Merz, Germany has a leader now who is also willing to lead and taking the heat for it, right? So I think Europe will be very present there, and also like hopefully speaking much more with one voice and being better kind of prepared and coordinated in which role which country plays. That's my feeling. They're really smart with that, and the teams working for the leaders. Yeah, it's going to be exciting, especially the NATO summit. I think I will travel there myself. I'm glad that I can do that. I wouldn't have too many expectations when it comes to Donald Trump, but I was really glad to hear 2 days ago when his spokesperson, Caroline, confirmed that Donald Trump will be at the NATO summit. That's good, because that was also not just until a couple of days ago. So I think we are now in a phase where we should have a little bit of hope. Europe seems to be coming together. It is stronger when it stands together. It's good that Germany is back in the front seat. And this waiting phase between the election and the implementation of the new government is over, and that we have a chancellor who stands up for the needs of Germany and Europe. So it's a better, we have been in worse places over the last months, I think. And I appreciate that and embrace that, because we all need a little bit of positive news, I think.
I mean, there's still a lot of work ahead. And as you said, Friedrich Merz is in his honeymoon phase. I think there's got to be a steep learning curve for him and for his cabinet as things sort of fall into place. But I think you're absolutely right. As far as the relationship with Washington is concerned, there are grounds to have a little bit more hope than we had previously. And that's something to build on. But one still has to anticipate the unexpected, right? And that nothing is secure and nothing is guaranteed. I think obviously a lot for us to watch in the days and weeks ahead. It's been great to get your insights on the Merz visit, and maybe we should talk again when you come back from The Hague after the NATO summit, because I think that will be very interesting as well to hear how that went and what those dynamics were, particularly when it comes to Europe's security architecture moving forward, and the future of NATO, because this is an institution that Trump has questioned in the past as well, and yet one which the Europeans truly rely on and believe in.
Absolutely, Stephen. It's always great talking to you, meeting you, and I wish you all a good weekend and talk to you soon.
Many thanks. Herzlichen Dank.
Tschüss, alles Liebe, ne?
Danke. Tschüss.